Let me ask you something, and I want you, the person listening right now, to really think about this for a second. Do you think you and I are seeing the same internet?
That's a remarkably heavy question once you strip away all the assumptions we just, casually carry around every day.
Right. And I don't mean like, do we have different opinions on the exact same news article? I mean, literally. Do you think we're seeing the same posts, the same news stories, like the same underlying facts about the world?
I think most people instinctively assume there is a baseline reality to the digital world. We operate under this illusion that the internet is like a shared newspaper, right? And we're all just choosing to read different pages of it.
Exactly. We think, oh, I'm in the sports section, you're in the politics section, but we're holding the exact same paper. But here's the part that is honestly kind of terrifying. What if two people could live in the exact same city, have the exact same job, be the exact same age, and yet be living in completely different realities?
Yeah.
Not just different viewpoints, like entirely different facts.
It's a fundamental break in how human society functions. Because we've transitioned from an environment where we debated what to do about a shared set of facts to an environment where the facts themselves are entirely dependent on who is actually looking at the screen.
Right. Just think about your everyday life. Think about Spotify. Your Discover Weekly playlist is probably fire, right? It knows your taste perfectly. It feeds you that exact blend of indie folk or, underground 90s hip hop that you love. If I listen to your Discover Weekly, it might be complete trash to me. Or think about TikTok.
Oh, TikTok is the perfect example.
Right. If you look over a friend's shoulder at their TikTok feed, it is basically a direct reflection of their brain at this point. It's almost too intimate.
It really is.
We've all just casually accepted this massive shift in how we consume the world. You don't go looking for stuff anymore. Stuff comes looking for you.
And, in the realm of entertainment, we embrace that because it's incredibly convenient. I mean, a personalized music feed is a wonderful piece of technology. It feels like magic.
Yeah, for sure.
But the underlying architecture, the exact same machine learning mechanisms that map your auditory preferences that is now being applied to news. It's being applied to politics, to civic information, and basically to objective reality.
Okay, cool for music, cool for memes, but when that exact same mechanism hits the news, that's when it gets incredibly weird. Because now it's not just about taste, it's about reality.
Exactly.
You see one version of a story, I see a completely different version, and we both walk away convinced we are absolutely right. Because that is literally all we saw.
Which is the core focus of the stack of research we are analyzing today on this deep dive.
Yeah, we have a ton of material to get through today.
We do. We're looking at peer-reviewed papers from Nature and Science, network topology research from the University of Pennsylvania, massive algorithmic audits of Twitter across 7 different countries, and even historical texts examining the foundational concept of the public sphere.
It's a lot. Because we're not arguing without opinions anymore. We're arguing from completely different sets of facts. So to understand how our realities are splitting into these parallel dimensions, we first have to understand why the platforms are doing this in the first place.
Right.
And it's not because they want to brainwash us.
I wouldn't use the term brainwash, no.
Yeah.
That implies a centralized ideological intent.
Yeah.
What the research from NSU Works on the attention economy shows is that the mechanism is actually far more capitalistic.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's much more automated.
How so?
Well, the foundational premise is that these platforms are not public utilities. They operate on a surveillance capitalism business model.
Okay.
Their revenue is tied entirely to advertising, and advertising revenue is inextricably linked to time on device. So simply put, they need your eyes on the screen for as long as humanly possible.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because I feel like we throw around terms like surveillance capitalism and it sounds very doom and gloom. If I spend my weekend watching woodworking videos and the algorithm realizes I love woodworking and it starts showing me endless tutorials on how to cut a perfect mortise and tenon joint, I love that. I don't feel exploited. I feel understood.
Right.
It's giving me what I want. So at what precise point does a helpful, personalized algorithm turn into something dangerous?
That is a very fair distinction to make. Serving you woodworking videos is indeed good customer service.
Right.
The line is crossed, according to the NSU Works research, when the platform moves from satisfying an interest to actively exploiting your psychological vulnerabilities just to prevent you from leaving.
Okay, how exactly do they do that? Break down the mechanics for me. Because everyone says, oh, the algorithm, it's a guy named Al sitting in a room pulling levers. What is actually happening when I scroll?
Let's look at the evolution of audience tracking. In the old days of television, advertisers used Nielsen ratings.
Right, the little boxes on the TVs.
Exactly. It was a very crude demographic-based measurement. They knew that a certain show attracted males aged 18 to 35. But modern machine learning doesn't do that. When you open an app, you aren't just a demographic. You are a data node in a massive, multidimensional vector space.
Wow, okay.
The algorithm tracks your specific digital footprint. But it's not just tracking what you watch. It tracks how you watch it.
What do you mean by how?
Well, how many milliseconds did you hover over that image before scrolling? Did you turn the volume up? Did you open the comment section, type a reply, and then delete it without posting?
Wait, they track the stuff I type and don't even post.
Absolutely. Every micro-interaction is a data point. The system uses collaborative filtering. It maps your micro-behaviors against millions of other users.
Okay.
So if it finds a million people who exhibit your exact swiping patterns, it knows with startling mathematical precision what piece of content will keep you on the app for another 30 seconds. And the researchers point out that to achieve this, the platforms employ variable reward mechanisms.
Variable rewards,
Yes.
like the psychology behind a slot machine.
Essentially, yes. When you pull the lever on a slot machine or when you pull down on your screen to refresh your feed, you don't know what you're going to get.
Right.
It might be a boring update from a relative, or it might be a highly stimulating piece of moral outrage, a hilarious meme, or a deeply validating political post. This intermittent reinforcement triggers dopamine releases in the brain that are incredibly difficult for our evolutionary hardware to resist.
So it's not really about the content itself.
Not entirely, no. The goal isn't just to show you woodworking. The goal is to figure out the exact sequence of emotional triggers, whether it's joy, awe, or furious anger that literally hijacks your cognitive processing.
So we have these ancient hunter-gatherer brains built to forage for berries and spot predators, and we are putting them up against supercomputers whose only goal is to find the precise sequence of pixels to keep us scrolling.
That's a great way to frame it.
And what they've found is that showing us things that make us feel right or things that make us angry at the people who are wrong is the ultimate glue for human attention.
That is the core of it. Our evolutionary confirmation bias was highly advantageous when we lived in small tribes. We needed to quickly align with our group for survival.
Sure, you don't want to get kicked out of the cave.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But today, we are inundated with more information in a single afternoon than our ancestors encountered in a lifetime. The human brain physically cannot process it all. So confirmation bias kicks in as an automatic defense mechanism.
It's like a shortcut.
Precisely. We naturally seek out information that validates our existing worldview because it requires less cognitive load. The algorithm observes this empirical behavior, and instead of providing a balanced view, it feeds that bias on an endless loop.
Which brings us to the actual invisible structures that these algorithms build around us. We hear the terms filter bubble and echo chamber thrown around constantly, usually by politicians yelling at each other on TV.
Constantly, yes.
But if you actually dig into the research, they aren't just buzzwords. They are very specific structural environments.
They are, and the distinction between the two is vital. The term filter bubble was coined by Eli Pariser back in 2011. He noticed a fascinating phenomenon. If two people Google the exact same term, his example was the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill, they would get wildly different results.
Just from searching the same two letters.
Yes. One person might get search results entirely focused on British petroleum stock prices and investment news, while the other person received results entirely about the environmental devastation of the spill.
Oh, wow.
The algorithm implicitly filtered the world based on their past search history.
Right, so a filter bubble is just the algorithm quietly hiding things it doesn't think you want to see. But the philosopher C.T. Nguyen, in the Cambridge University press text we reviewed, he draws a really sharp line between a filter bubble and an echo chamber, doesn't he?
Yes, Nguyen provides a canonical framework here. He defines an epistemic bubble as an environment where opposing views are simply omitted. You just don't hear the other side.
Okay.
Not because of malice, but because your network is curated. Maybe you only follow your friends, and your friends all happen to share your political views. You have an incomplete picture of the world, but you aren't inherently hostile to new information.
So an epistemic bubble is like having a dinner party and just forgetting to invite your neighbors. You aren't mad at them, they just aren't in the room.
That analogy works up to a point, but it misses the active hostility that defines the second structure. An echo chamber, according to Nguyen, is not just about omission.
Okay, what is it then?
It is an environment where opposing views are actively discredited.
Sure.
It's not that you don't hear the other side. You actually hear them all the time. But you have been structurally conditioned to believe that the other side is corrupt, malicious, and entirely untrustworthy.
Okay, so to fix my analogy in echo chamber is when you do invite your neighbors to the dinner party, but before they arrive, you spend an hour telling all your other guests how terrible, lying, and manipulative those neighbors are. So when they finally walk in and start talking, nobody listens to a single word they say.
That is a much more accurate representation. What's fascinating here is that the architecture of an echo chamber relies heavily on what Nguyen calls feedback loops,
Like an audio feedback loop.
somewhat similar in effect. You have intranetwork feedback loops, which happen between members within the chamber, constantly validating and amplifying their trust in each other. And critically, you have internetwork feedback loops, which define the relationship with the outside world.
How does that work?
The echo chamber constantly points to the outside world as proof of a conspiracy or of moral decay, using the existence of differing opinions to actually intensify the distrust. They weaponize the feeling of being under attack to solidify trust inside the group.
Look, if you spend enough time online, it feels like literally everyone is trapped in one of these militant echo chambers. But the data doesn't actually support that panic, does it? The Royal Society data we looked at had a very different take.
The Royal Society data provides a crucial reality check. While the cultural panic about echo chambers is incredibly high, the empirical evidence shows that strict, politically partisan online echo chambers are actually quite rare.
Really?
Yes. In the UK, their studies estimate that only about 6 to 8% of the public actually inhabits these tightly bounded, enclosed media spaces where they are entirely insulated from any rebuttal.
I have to admit, when I read that, I was shocked. Only 6 to 8%. That feels way too low based on how toxic everything feels.
It does seem counterintuitive. But we have to remember that for the vast majority of people, their online media diet is somewhat varied, even if accidentally. You might follow a political pundit, but you also follow a local news station, a sports team, and, a cooking channel.
Right, right. The algorithm is feeding you pasta recipes alongside the politics.
Exactly. The varied inputs prevent a total seal. However, the researchers emphasize two caveats. First, that 6 to 8% is highly politically active and drives a disproportionate amount of public debate. Second, and more importantly, you do not need to live in a strict, impenetrable echo chamber to become deeply polarized.
I totally buy that. Because if only a tiny fraction of people are fully sealed off, but society as a whole feels like it's ripping at the seams, something else must be going on. And here's where it gets really interesting. This is the research that completely blew my mind. I am talking about the study published in the journal Nature by researchers at UPenn and the University of Houston.
Oh, yes.
Because this answers the question, if we aren't all in echo chambers, how exactly does the architecture of a social network tip the scales of reality for the rest of us?
You are referring to the concept of information gerrymandering, which is arguably one of the most profound discoveries in recent network science. To understand it, we have to look at the experiment they built, which they called the voter game.
Yeah, let's get into this.
They didn't just scrape Twitter data. They built a controlled laboratory environment with over 2,500 human subjects to see how network structure influences collective decision-making.
Let's really get into the weeds on this because the setup is fascinating. They took these human players and split them into two equal-sized parties, the yellow party and the purple party. So imagine a game with 24 people, exactly 12 yellow players, exactly 12 purple players. And their goal is simply to vote.
Correct. But the brilliance is in the network topology. The players cannot see all 23 other people in the game. They are placed into a specific digital network structure, and they can only see a local poll of a few specific people they're directly connected to their neighbors in the network.
And the incentives were set up to mirror real-world compromise. If a player's assigned party wins a supermajority, say 60% of the total vote, that player gets a maximum payout, let's say $2. But if the vote is too close and results in a deadlock where neither side hits 60%, nobody gets anything. $0. However, if you concede and the opposing party reaches 60%, you still get a small consolation payout, like 50 cents.
The researchers term this a compromise worldview. They're essentially telling the participants, try to get your team to win, but above all else, avoid a tie. It is better to compromise and lose than to stubbornly deadlock and get nothing.
Makes sense.
It mimics a functional, healthy democratic process where citizens prioritize the continuation of the system over absolute ideological victory.
Right, so you're sitting at your computer, you're a purple player, you want purple to win, but you look at your little screen, and the only people you are connected to your local network are all voting yellow.
Yes.
You're going to look at that and think, man, yellow is sweeping this. I better flip my vote to yellow just to make sure we don't deadlock so I can at least get my 50 cents.
Precisely the mechanism at play. A player's decision to flip their vote is entirely dictated by the local environment they can observe. Now, if the network is structured randomly, if everyone sees an equal mix of yellow and purple players, the game is perfectly fair. The 50-50 split remains stable.
But they didn't leave it random.
No. The researchers asked a dangerous question. What happens if we manipulate the invisible lines connecting these players?
And this is the information gerrymandering. We all understand geographical gerrymandering in politics. Politicians draw these insane, squiggly district lines on a map. They use a tactic called packing and cracking.
Exactly.
They pack all of their opponents' voters into one single district, so those votes are essentially wasted. And then they crack their own voters, spreading them out just enough across multiple districts so they can win those areas by a slim margin of 51%, and manipulate the geography to guarantee a win, even if they have fewer total voters.
Exactly. What the nature study proved mathematically is that you do not need physical maps to do this. You can do it with the flow of information in a social network. They define this through a metric called influence assortment.
What does that mean in this context?
Well, positive influence assortment means you are primarily connected to people who agree with you. Negative influence assortment means you are primarily connected to people who disagree with you.
So take our 12 yellow players and 12 purple players. How do you mathematically gerrymander them?
You structure the network so that the purple party is tightly clustered together. You create an epistemic bubble for them. A purple player looks around and sees only other purple players. They feel incredibly confident.
Right, they think they're winning.
But their influence is entirely wasted because they're only convincing people who already agree with them. They are packed.
Meanwhile, you take the 12 yellow players and you strategically distribute their connections. You make sure that the yellow players are interacting with just enough persuadable purple members.
Yes. You place the yellow nodes in the network so that a few crucial purple players look at their local poll and see a flood of yellow votes. Those purple players, operating under the compromise worldview, get spooked.
They think they're losing the whole game.
They think yellow is winning the overall game, so they flip their vote to avoid the deadlock penalty. The yellow party is punching above its weight by optimizing the efficiency of its influence, while the purple party's influence is rendered structurally inefficient.
And the outcome of this manipulation is staggering. The researchers found that even when the game started perfectly fair, 12 purple, 12 yellow, and even when every single player had the exact same amount of influence, meaning there were no celebrities or mega influencers in the game,
Right, everyone was equal.
the sheer structure of the network could predictably result in a 60-40 win for the yellow party. The network topology didn't just influence the game, it completely dictated the reality of the outcome.
It is a chilling realization. A society that is perfectly evenly split can arrive at a heavily skewed collective decision entirely due to the hidden architecture of how they are connected to one another.
It's wild.
But the researchers took the simulation one step further, reflecting the darker realities of our current internet. They introduced what they termed zealot bots.
Because in reality, not everyone is playing for the $2 payout. Not everyone has a compromise worldview. You have people online who have a zero-sum worldview. They would happily take a $0 payout and burn the entire game to the ground before they ever let the other team win.
Exactly. The researchers simulated this uncompromising behavior by dropping automated bots into the human network. These bots were programmed to act as zealots. They would vote yellow, and they would never, under any mathematical circumstance, change their vote, regardless of what their local poll showed.
And what happened to the humans?
The results were highly asymmetric. The researchers discovered that they only needed to place a minuscule number of these zealot bots into the network to completely skew the outcome.
How many?
Just a handful. If you place a few uncompromising, highly vocal nodes at the structural bottlenecks of the network, they project an illusion of overwhelming majority. They artificially create an information gerrymander that forces the human players who are still operating in good faith trying to compromise to concede.
This fundamentally shatters how we think about persuasion. I always thought that to change society, you had to have the best argument, and you had to convince 1 million people to change their minds.
That's the classical view, yes.
But this study proves you don't need to convince anyone. You just need to control the network structure. Or you just need to drop a few uncompromising bots in front of the right persuadable people. You change what a few key people see, and you completely alter the democratic outcome.
Which forces us to look beyond laboratory settings.
Mhm.
I mean, the voter game proves the mathematical vulnerability of networks. But what does this look like in the messy, chaotic environment of real global politics? Does this happen on the platforms we scroll every morning?
For that, we turn to a truly massive piece of research. This is the algorithmic audit of Twitter, conducted by researchers across multiple institutions before the platform was rebranded as X. This wasn't a survey. This was an empirical audit of the platform's actual back-end behavior.
It's a landmark study.
They took a randomized control group of nearly 2 million daily active users, and they compared the personalized algorithmic timeline, the one that recommends what you should see, against a simple reverse chronological timeline, where tweets just appear in the exact order they were posted with no algorithmic interference.
The methodology is crucial here. By comparing the algorithmic feed to the chronological baseline, they could isolate the exact amplification effect of the algorithm. They wanted to see if the machine learning models were systematically distributing the content of certain political groups more widely than others.
Now, before we get into what they found, I need to speak directly to you, the listener. We are about to discuss data regarding political amplification involving the right and the left. I want to be unequivocally clear, we are not taking a political side here.
Absolutely not.
We are not endorsing the views, the policies, or the morality of any political party mentioned. We are strictly, impartially reporting the empirical findings of these researchers regarding how lines of code decided to distribute content.
That neutrality is essential because the findings of the audit are stark. The researchers analyzed millions of tweets posted by elected legislators from major political parties across 7 different countries, and what they discovered was a pervasive, systemic asymmetry.
What did the asymmetry look like?
In 6 out of the 7 countries analyzed, the mainstream political right enjoyed significantly higher algorithmic amplification than the mainstream political left.
And when they narrowed their focus to the United States media landscape specifically, they found the exact same trend. The algorithmic amplification slightly but consistently favored right-leaning news sources over left-leaning news sources. And the sheer scale of this amplification is wild. In some cases, the amplification effects exceeded 200%. That means certain political messages were reaching an audience 3 times the size of their actual follower base, entirely because the algorithm decided to inject those tweets into the feeds of people who didn't even follow them.
But presenting that data immediately begs the question, why? Is the algorithm explicitly coded by engineers in Silicon Valley to favor a specific political ideology? The researchers and the broader literature on algorithmic design strongly suggest the answer is no.
So there's no guy at a keyboard saying, push this party.
Right. There is no line of code that says boost this political party. The algorithm is essentially blind to ideology. It is, however, hypersensitive to engagement.
Right back to the attention economy stuff.
It brings us right back to the NSU Works research. The machine's only objective function is to maximize time on device.
It just wants to keep you scrolling.
Exactly. And to do that, it analyzes which types of posts generate the most friction. Does a post get a lot of quote tweets? Does it drive people to click an external link? Does it generate massive rapid-fire reply threads? In political science, the most reliable driver of this kind of engagement is effective polarization.
Which means what, exactly?
It's a clinical term for intense emotional hostility toward the opposing side.
Outrage bait.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
If a particular political strategy or a specific media ecosystem utilizes more emotionally provocative, sensationalized, or fear-based framing, the algorithm will naturally attach to it. The algorithm is simply a mirror, reflecting and magnifying whatever rhetorical tactics generate the most visceral human reactions.
So if one side, and again, the data says in this specific snapshot, it was the political right is using messaging that relies heavily on high emotion, high friction framing. The algorithm just blindly scoops that up. It says, wow, people are really fighting in the comments of this post. Let's show it to 1 million more people.
Yes.
And suddenly their influence is mathematically gerrymandered to be massive.
Yes. And there's a fascinating nuance in the study that supports this mechanistic view. The researchers noted that when they analyzed the amplification of individual politicians' accounts, rather than the parties as a collective whole, the association between party membership and amplification vanished.
Wait, really?
Yes, this implies that the platform isn't picking favorite individuals. Rather, it is responding to the systemic, network-wide framing of the messages produced by the collective group.
There is also one finding from this audit that I think completely shatters a myth we all believe. I always assume that algorithms supercharge the absolute fringes of society. You know, the extreme far-left anarchists and the extreme far-right nationalists. We assume the fringes are getting all the algorithmic juice.
That is the prevailing narrative in most media coverage. But the empirical data from the audit did not support that hypothesis.
Which is crazy to me.
It is surprising. The researchers found absolutely no evidence that the algorithm amplifies far-left or far-right extremist groups more than moderate mainstream voices. The massive disparity in amplification, the warping of the political landscape, is happening squarely within the mainstream political parties. It is the center of our civic discourse that is being unevenly distorted by these recommender systems.
Which honestly makes it feel infinitely more destabilizing. If it was just the fringes operating in an alternate reality, you could maybe manage that. But it's not. The center of society is being algorithmically tilted.
Exactly.
So if we take everything we've discussed so far, we are seeing completely different feeds. Those feeds are structurally biased to maximize outrage for ad revenue, and the network topologies mathematically gerrymander our civic decisions. What happens to a society when there is literally no shared truth anymore?
To understand the gravity of that outcome, we must look at the philosophical bedrock of how democracies function. And here we get into the ideas of the German sociologist Jürgen Habermas, specifically his concept of the public sphere.
The public sphere.
Yes. Habermas argued that a functioning democracy relies absolutely on a shared, accessible space where citizens can gather, free from state censorship or corporate coercion, to use reason to debate facts and form public opinion.
Historically, that was the literal town square, or, the coffee houses in the 18th century. And then it evolved into the newspapers, the broadcast news networks, what we call the Fourth Estate.
Correct.
It was a shared, somewhat centralized reality. You might passionately disagree with the editorial page of the newspaper, but everyone in town was reading the same front page headline. You started from the same baseline of facts.
Exactly. The Fourth Estate acted as a mediator of reality. Human editors, flawed and biased as they may have been, utilized a blend of ethical principles and editorial judgment to determine newsworthiness. But what the research points out is that this historical mediation has been completely usurped by platform algorithms.
Right.
We have traded human editors who operated with at least some concept of civic responsibility for mathematical algorithms that operate purely on empirical observation of your past behavior. The algorithm doesn't ask, is this true? And is it important for a citizen to know? It asks, will this specific user click on this based on what they clicked on yesterday?
I was thinking about this, and I want to bounce a theory off you. What if this fracturing of the public sphere doesn't stop at just having different news feeds? What if reality itself becomes a tiered subscription service?
Elaborate on that. What do you mean by tiered reality?
Think about how software works. You have the free version and the premium version. Imagine a near future, or maybe we are already in it, where there is a free tier of reality. You log on to standard social media, and it is messy, chaotic, filled with partisan rage, AI-generated slop, and outrage bait, because that is the cheap content that pays the bills.
I see where you're going with this.
But then there's a premium tier of reality. You pay a high monthly subscription, and you get access to a curated, verified, meticulously fact-checked network of high-signal information. The wealthy get objective reality, and everyone else gets algorithmically generated rage.
It is a dystopian thought experiment, but sociologically, we're already seeing the foundational cracks that would support such a system. And those cracks are driven by an unprecedented crisis of institutional trust. The Pew Research data from March 2025 that we analyzed paints a grim picture of the current landscape.
Yeah, the trust numbers are brutal.
They are. Over the past decade, public trust in national and local news organizations has steadily plummeted, heavily fractured along partisan lines.
People just don't believe the traditional gatekeepers anymore.
They don't. And ironically, trust in the information coming from social media sites remains universally abysmal across the board.
Nobody trusts social media, but everybody uses it for 4 hours a day. It's the ultimate toxic relationship.
And this pervasive lack of trust leads to what researchers call epistemic closure. Because the digital landscape is so fragmented, contradictory, and overwhelming, people retreat. They establish highly self-contained belief systems. They decide that only a few chosen authorities within their in-group are legitimate, and they dismiss all outside evidence as inherently unreliable, biased, or fake news. They lock the door to their epistemic bubble from the inside.
If everyone is locking their doors and living in their own bespoke, algorithmically generated universe, how do we even function as a society? How do you govern a country where people don't share a reality?
There's a brilliant quote from Kevin Kelly, the co-founder of Wired magazine, that was cited in the Reuters report we reviewed. It captures the essence of this crisis perfectly. He said, "Truth is no longer dictated by authorities, but is networked by peers."
Truth is networked by peers. That completely changes the definition of truth.
It does. It means that if a piece of information, no matter how factually accurate, heavily researched, or objectively true it is, does not show up in your curated algorithmic network, it literally does not exist in your reality. Facts, alternative facts, deliberate disinformation, and sincere opinions all sit side by side in a social media feed, perfectly flattened visually. They all look like identical rectangles on a screen, leaving audiences entirely confused and reliant on their peers to tell them what is real.
The wild part about all of this is that we're all in it, including us. I am sitting here dissecting the attention economy, and I know for an absolute fact that when I open my phone later tonight, I'm going to get sucked into a 45-minute video essay about the history of Roman aqueducts because the algorithm knows exactly what kind of nerd I am.
Exactly.
We like what we are shown. We stay where it is comfortable. We think we're making choices, but we are actively being shaped. It's so easy to point the finger at Silicon Valley and blame faceless tech billionaires for breaking reality. But how much of this curated reality are we actively choosing ourselves?
It is the most uncomfortable truth of this entire deep dive. We are not just passive victims strapped to a chair. We are active collaborators in our own manipulation. The study utilizing social bots on Weibo, which is the largest microblogging platform in China, illustrates this human element perfectly.
What did they find on Weibo?
The researchers drew a vital, nuanced distinction between two types of polarization. The first is opinion polarization. This is a natural, historical human tendency. People have always formed groups with similar views, shared similar opinions, and generally avoided those who vehemently disagree with them.
Right. High school cafeterias have worked like that since the dawn of time. The punks sit with the punks. The jocks sit with the jocks.
Exactly. Human nature drives opinion polarization. But the second type is information polarization, which is a modern phenomenon where people do not even have access to diverse content and sources. The platforms enforce information polarization structurally through their recommendation algorithms. However, the algorithm can only build its cage using the behavioral materials we provide.
We hand them the bricks.
We do. Every time we angrily share a post mocking a political opponent, every time we block a dissenting voice rather than engaging with it, every time we linger for 3 extra seconds on a sensationalized, fear-mongering headline, we are handing the algorithm the exact mathematical blueprint to our own epistemic bubble.
We are training the puppy to bite us. So if the algorithm broke our shared reality and we enthusiastically helped it do it, can the algorithm fix it? Are we just doomed to slide further and further into these customized, walled gardens of rage until society completely fractures? Or is there a way to actually engineer our way out of this?
This is where we finally find a glimmer of genuine, evidence-based hope. And it comes from a recent, incredibly ambitious paper published in the journal Science by Picardi and colleagues out of Stanford University. They ask a brilliant, disruptive question. What if we don't wait for the platforms to voluntarily change their algorithms? What if we intercept the feed ourselves?
The Stanford experiment. I am not exaggerating when I say this is the most audacious piece of research I've read all year. Break down exactly what they did, because it literally sounds like benevolent hacker magic.
It essentially is benevolent hacking. The researchers conducted a large-scale field experiment with active users on X, formerly Twitter. They recruited a cohort of participants and had them install a specialized, custom-built browser extension on their computers. As these participants scrolled through their normal everyday feed, this extension intercepted the data coming from the server before it rendered on the user's screen.
So the extension is sitting right in the middle, playing traffic cop between the Twitter algorithm and your eyeballs.
Precisely. And in that split second of interception, the extension utilized a large language model and advanced AI to analyze the text and context of every single tweet in the feed. They specifically trained this LLM to identify posts containing what they defined as partisan animosity.
How does an AI define animosity? Is it just looking for swear words?
No, it was much more sophisticated than simple keyword flagging. The LLM used contextual sentiment analysis. It was looking for anti-democratic attitudes, intense partisan hostility, moral outrage, and demagoguery. For example, a tweet saying, "I disagree with the senator's tax policy because of X and Y" would be flagged as civil discourse. But a tweet saying, "The senator and his supporters are literal human garbage trying to destroy the country" would be flagged for partisan animosity.
Okay, so the AI spots the toxic tweet. What does the browser extension do? Does it delete it?
Crucially, no. They did not censor the users. They did not block accounts or hide information. They simply re-ranked the feed. When the AI detected a highly toxic, hostile political post, the browser extension dynamically downranked it, pushing it further down the page where the user was less likely to scroll. Conversely, it upranked posts that contained more civil, substantive political discourse, pushing them to the top of the feed.
They didn't censor anything, they just rearranged the furniture. They took the toxic, screaming arguments and put them in the basement, and they brought the calm, civil conversations up to the living room.
Exactly. And the results of this re-ranking were nothing short of extraordinary. Remember, these participants were just scrolling their normal, personalized feeds during a highly charged political environment leading up to the 2024 U.S. election. By simply downranking hostility and upranking civility, the users experienced a significant, measurable drop in affective polarization and negative emotions.
It actually cooled down their brains just by changing the order of the rectangles on their screen.
It cooled them off substantially. To put the magnitude of this psychological shift into perspective, the researchers noted that the reduction in polarization experienced by the participants during the brief study period was equivalent to reversing roughly 3 years of natural societal polarization in the United States.
Wait, really? Reversing 3 years of societal damage just by tweaking the rank order of a feed? That is staggering. It gives me chills, honestly.
It should. Because if we connect this to the bigger picture, it proves a fundamental, undeniable truth. The toxicity, the extreme division, the alternate realities we are currently experiencing in our digital world, they are not an inevitability of human nature. They are not signs that society is fundamentally broken. They are a direct, measurable result of algorithmic design choices.
It means we aren't inherently broken. The machine is broken. And the machine could be fixed.
The tech platforms could choose to optimize their algorithms for democratic discourse, civil engagement, and social trust tomorrow. The technology exists. The proof of concept is right there, peer-reviewed in the Science Journal. The only thing preventing this shift is the capitalistic reality we discussed at the beginning. Optimizing for civic health does not generate the same level of compulsive, variable reward engagement and therefore the same level of advertising revenue as optimizing for partisan animosity.
We used to argue about the truth. We would sit at a dinner table or watch a televised debate, and we would argue fiercely about what the facts meant for our country. But we shared the facts. We stood on the same ground. Now, we don't even share the same truth. Your truth is customized specifically for your engagement, and my truth is customized specifically for mine.
It's a completely fractured landscape.
So the real question isn't what's true anymore. The question is who is deciding what you get to see.
It is the defining question of our era. If a simple algorithmic tweak, a browser extension running a language model, can literally dial down our hatred for one another by 3 years' worth of polarization, what does it say about human free will? That our baseline empathy toward our fellow citizens is currently being controlled by a line of code on a server rack somewhere.
It's enough to make you want to throw your phone in the ocean. Next time you pull out your phone, next time you open your favorite app and start scrolling, I want you to take a hard, conscious look at your feed. Look at the stories, the anger, the outrage, the weirdly specific recommendations, and ask yourself, whose reality am I looking at?